Amateur Girl and Fanboy present the Big Bad Glass Movie Review.
This is considered the fourth best British film of all the 20th century. It's considered, like, of course, the top 100 thrillers of all time or movies of all time. But for Hitchcock, you know anything about Alfred Hitchcock?
Not really. I'm sorry. Sorry, the
film directors of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, for those who don't know, he's made so many big movies through the 40s and into the 50s and into the 60s, but his big time was the 50s and early 60s. The Birds, Vertigo,
Right.
Psycho.
The Birds.
Psycho
The Birds is one of my favorites, and Psycho was amazing.
You like animals and knives, I guess. Animals and knives. I thought what got me as an old-fashioned movie was the death of the spy. She was very humorous. I mean, it's like, one of those kind of deaths, right? It was like a little bit over the top. And they have made a spoof of this on Broadway where they actually have 4 actors to play every part. So anyway, another thing but a lot of the little things that Hitchcock had running through his career, North by Northwest, again, definitely, it was almost like a remake of 39 Steps, if you've ever seen North by Northwest with Cary Grant, made in 1959. Or 58, I can't remember which year, but very early on, they said that was the inspiration to make James Bond. That inspired the producers who did the first James Bond, Dr. No, were inspired by North by Northwest. And so Hitchcock basically inspired the whole James Bond series too. And from James Bond, of course, you get Mission Impossible. So it all ties together. Hitchcock is the mother of, he is the link between the early thrillers and present day, and of course, Mission Impossible 7.1, right? And all the elements he used in 39 Steps are right there in Mission Impossible. I'm sure Christopher McQuarrie, I think his name, Christopher McQuarrie, the director and writer, I'm sure he, was very familiar with all this work because it's obviously he used a lot of the stuff over and over. But the one thing I was going to talk about, and this has been talked about a lot, and books have been written, is the use of Hitchcock and his women. Madeleine Carroll being the very first blonde, they call them the ice cold blondes, Hitchcock's ice cold blondes, and he used them over and over again in all his movies. He loved to have blonde actresses, and they were very chilly, and they're always, we're talking about reluctant companion. They're always reluctant. They don't want to be pushed around. They're always struggling to be free. And they relate that with Hitchcock's, sad life. He was married and had kids and everything, but he always had this longing for these beautiful models and stuff. And then he's presented as a director. He's presented with these women all the time in front of him, and he's a heavyset guy, and he's not the most good-looking guy. And listening to his little interview with Truffaut, I was struck by his strange way of talking. I mean, you see that in television, right? You ever watched Alfred Hitchcock Presents?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Yeah, so you know how he talks, that funny way of talking. And so she was the first of those women, was Madeleine Carroll. And then he became a thing, I guess. And in today's standards, he'd probably be run out of Hollywood because of the way he treated some of these women. Like I said, in
the writing that came across to me, I definitely noticed that.
Oh well, talk about Charlie Bennett, who wrote the screenplay or from the book. It's interesting. I looked him up. He was a playwright, and then he wrote a lot of the early movies of Hitchcock in Hollywood. So he came to Hollywood with Hitchcock, which one of them I like, Saboteur. I particularly like that movie from the 40s. Where they climb up the Statue of Liberty and fight up on the statue. I like that movie. But Charlie Bennett, he went on to doing a lot of TV in the 50s and 60s, which is funny to me. He's considered this really high-class playwright and screenwriter, but he did a lot of television. I mean, a lot of television, because I was going through his filmography. I'm like, wow, this guy almost just gave up on movies and just went to TV, right? But what I'd like to know, what did you notice about the girl, the female part?
I mean, just probably, I'm sure it's a sign of the times, just the way that women were treated. And then, of course, I thought it was interesting
Wow.
about when they were staying in the little inn, and you know, I thought it was kind of interesting that the two people that checked them in, the husband and the wife, sort of let them stay there unmarried, which I think it just made me think about how that was seen back then, something like that, unmarried couples sharing a room together.
Right.
Scandalous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can still be kind of scandalous depending on what part of America you're in.
Really?
Oh God, yes.
Really?
Oh my God. Go to some place in Louisiana or some place down in Alabama or some places down there, and not Florida, not necessarily, but Alabama, Louisiana, maybe Virginia, I don't know. And check in with a guy.
Hmm.
You're gonna get some eyebrows being raised, you know.
I
Yeah,
know. I guess
they should remake that.
Living in California, it's, I guess it is different. So
The one that got me, and I think some people have made a lot of comments about this, is the farm scene with the and lady in the farm and
Oh yeah.
her horrible existence with the farmer.
Yeah.
And she's even beaten by the guy. Of course, they
Mhm.
don't show it, but I mean, because it's off screen. That's the thing about the British. They don't show a lot of, at least in those days, they're all about the sex, but they didn't like to show violence. And they've always been
Mhm.
kind of that way, a little bit, up until a certain time. They were always very open about the sexual part, but when it came to the violence, they kind
Yeah.
of like always, whereas Americans are at the opposite. Keep the sex down, keep the
Yeah.
violence up,
It's the
right?
opposite.
Yeah, it's
But isn't
funny.
it the way it should be? I mean,
I mean,
sex is natural. Violence. I mean, if you're going to expose your children to something, I mean,
it's
we have
so
so much
odd.
violence.
I mean, even Mission Impossible, they play the sex way down.
Hmm.
There's hardly any sexual things going on in there. It's just all underneath. You
Yeah.
know, I'm kind of glad, and we're gonna get back to Mission Impossible because there are strong ties between 39 Steps and Mission Impossible 7. So back to 39 Steps. I think I've covered everything. It's an important picture in movie history, especially in the genre of the thriller and which is and escapist entertainment, because that's basically where it started. Right there, the popcorn movie, the escapist entertainment movie, really started with that kind of running around, getting chased. The action film started with 39 Steps. There weren't very many movies like that, and eventually they replaced the running with cars, and then the cars are chasing each other. But Hitchcock just gave a quality to all that. It was like John Buchan, the guy who wrote 39 Steps. He said he'd read every crappy little Western novel when he was sick. He said he'd gotten sick when he went to Canada, and he read every crappy little Western novel, and he'd read everything, and he says he didn't know what else to do, so he sat down and wrote his own, and that became the 39 Steps, which was basically the cheap American Western novel. That was his version of it. but done with a bit of quality. And that's the same with Hitchcock. He's just taking these cheap, kind of like Indiana Jones did, taking the cheap, serial, low budget, little action movies that kids would watch on Saturday afternoons at the movie theaters, and then creating a big budget, action extravaganza out of it. And Hitchcock kind of did that with 39 Steps. Whereas 39 Steps, Hitchcock, improved on the book, I think. I mean, the book is good. You really don't learn much about Richard Haney, right? Like, who is this guy? Tell me who Richard Haney is. You can't, can you? He's just some guy who was at the theater, and he's like, what? You don't know anything about. In the book, you find out everything about him in the first page. They tell about where he's been, what he's doing. Like in the first page and a half, you know everything about his kid. And this one, you don't know anything. He's got an apartment. The spy seems to take a liking to him, and then pretty soon he's on this crazy adventure. It's like what? So but again, it's like the MacGuffin. No one really seems to care. With Tom Cruise's character, you get to learn a lot about him. He seems to be learning a little bit more about him in these movies, right?
Mhm.
Than we've known about him before. That he comes from the criminal underworld, which we didn't really know that. And maybe I did, but I can't remember. I'd like to go back and watch the first one again. I watched them all again during COVID. But the first one is pretty damn good. Brian De Palma, the famous director who made Scarface, directed the first Mission Impossible. And he gave it a fantastic look. And I don't know, maybe in that one you do learn about where this Tom Cruise's character came from, but you know, you can't lose touch with all that because again, it's like the MacGuffin. He just becomes a mad chase right through all of his movies. Orson Welles called it a masterpiece. Thought it was the greatest movie ever made because he was starting to, you know, he was young and he was starting to learn how to make movies himself. So this is one of his go-to movies to watch. But basically, Hitchcock used this idea of the innocent man having to go on the run over and over in his movies, right? The one time he did not, he kind of veered away from that was in Psycho, where it becomes a woman, but she's not innocent. She's not innocent at all, right? And but she's on the run also. But over and over, he uses this idea of an innocent person on the run. No! Our discussion of 39 Steps. Next week, we'll be talking about another movie, but we're not sure what.